Hey everybody, it's John from Denarii Games, and I'm doing another devlog. This time on a system we've been putting together for the last 2 weeks. Haven't spent much time recording videos because I've been head down coding, building a new Spellcraft system, which I'm going to show off right now. One of the things that I wanted to show was how we put it together and really talk a little bit about the philosophy behind it. So this is me, and this may be you too. This is me playing every RPG for the last 20 years. And this is the gameplay, right? Like once you've kind of mastered the sequence of actions you need to perform, you perform those same actions over and over and over again. And we wanted to create something fundamentally different. For our spellcraft system, we took inspiration from a couple games. Two Worlds 2 is one of them, where you're able to dynamically choose the element that you're working with. So, whether it's fire or air or water, you can see the kind of the visual effects change. And you'll also notice that, as I do that, we're kind of keeping track of that element because that's only one part of the spell. Let's switch it back to fire. The second step would be choosing the form that that particular element takes. So projectile, area, or protect, or summon, and we'll continue to refine this over time. But if I choose projectile in this case, we're going to get the proverbial fireball, which I'll fire off into the distance. Something like that. And of course I've got a kind of dummy opponent over here. Let me get a little closer and target him. There we go. So let's go ahead and cast that fireball at that particular target. But this time we're going to increase the amount of mana we're going to put into this particular spell, thereby increasing its damage. So let's go ahead and fire that off. And while that's happening, I'm going to go ahead and set up another spell. This time we'll do, well, I don't know, we'll do water. Freeze them in place. So let's take a look at how we put this thing together. So you may notice that we've got two of the core game creator modules in play. We've got shooter, and of course we have stats. We've replaced the default player shooter component with a customized one called player spellcraft. And that's going to track a couple different things. The attribute mana, so it knows what's its deducting every time you cast a spell, the element and the form that you've currently selected, and both of these then go in to inform the ammo that gets equipped automatically. The weapon is simply the hand effect, right? So it's either it's empty hand or perhaps you're holding a wand or a staff or something like that. And any of those can, of course, impact your attributes, like for example, the spell cost or the damage or things like that. But in this case, we're really just looking at the ammo. We ended up creating two new scriptable objects, element and form. Element, as we saw with fire, it has a particular status effect, which is a core stats function or capability where it sets them on fire and does damage over time. The weapon effect is, changes the visual effect in the hand, and then we have our normal actions that get fired off. In this case, it's going to try to equip the ammo every time you change your element. Forms are somewhat similar. If I look at the projectile, for example, some base definition up here, which shows up in the UI. Then we define which ammo are projectiles, and we're going to be able to cycle through those and choose the right one based on the element that's also equipped at that given time. Beyond that, it's really just a shooter under the covers. So when we fire off that fire projectile, for example, it is a shooter ammo, and all the normal settings apply. So the aiming, in this case, it's crosshair, and the rate of fire, and the animations that are played, and the delay before it's fired off. All that is just kind of core shooter capability. The thing we have to do is modify the ammo script to be able to add in some of the spellcraft capabilities. In particular, it's really about variable tracking. So when we fire off a spell, we want to track a couple things and pass those on to both the impact prefab or the projectile prefab, depending on what you're using. For the fireball, it's the projectile prefab. So if I go ahead and take a look at that, this is the object that gets pushed by physics, and then, the actual fireball itself. And normally we would always have the collider that's driven from the rigid body and the trigger. The collider is, in this case, the troll or whatever it is you end up hitting with that fireball. We also want to track the original shooter and the level of the spell, which we're going to use for damage as part of the actions. So these things have been added to ammo to be able to pass those on programmatically. The rest of the actions are by and large out of the box, with the exception of the statistics one. Normally with statistics, you would have the top part. So the target in this case is that collider variable, which again would be the troll. The attribute health, we're going to add in some formula. What's new is for this particular action that we created is that we can now pass in a variable that applies to that formula. So this would be the level of that fireball, the amount of mana you put into it will impact the damage. But otherwise, it's just a normal formula. So if I look at it, kind of traditional Dungeons and Dragons, so a number of d6s depending on the level of the fireball. So 1d6, 2d6, 3d6, and so on. But as I said, it's really kind of a core system that's built on top of shooter and stats, and it really speaks to the strength and flexibility of those particular code bases that allows us to build a system like this on top of it with a fair amount of custom code, granted, but really didn't have to do a lot. The only thing left for me to do to kind of flesh this out is to change some of the targeting that we get out of the box, and then also we're using combat. I want to change some of that targeting and make it a little bit more refined to our use case at least. And then of course we've got to flesh out the forms and elements to make a complete game. But that's what I wanted to share on the devlog. About 2 weeks worth of work, and pretty happy with where it came out. Have a good night.